Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because I think that you are connected from many parts of the world. My name is Stefanos Fotiou. I'm the Director of Environment and Development Division in the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and I'm very pleased to join and moderate this panel today, parts of the EGM 2020, and organized within the Scale 2020. Our session will be on the circular economy as the next big opportunity. I have the really big pleasure and honor to be joined by three experts on issues of circular economy and sustainability. Mr. Henry Chan, the Conservation Director of WWF Malaysia, Ms. Regula Sek, the Managing Director of Asia on Circulate Capital, and Ms. Lorraine Gatlabayan, which is a senior expert on sustainable consumption and production for Southeast Asia, China, and Mongolia. We will try in the next 1.5 hours with the experts and with you, dear participants, to explore how green economy and how circular economy could be actually an answer to a better development paradigm. I will explain to you how the session will run, and then we will start with the session. I will give an introductory presentation to frame the dialogue we'll have today. Then our three experts, Mr. Chan, Ms. Seg, and Ms. Katlabayan, will give also their presentations, and then we will go in a round of questions and answers. Please take your time after you listen to the presentations from the experts to put your questions to the organizers, and we will try to address all of them. I will now share my screen to start my introductory presentation. I hope you can see the screen, and organizers, if there's any problem, please let me know. So I just want to take 7-8 minutes of your time to give an argument why we have a big need and actually opportunity to start working seriously on circular economy. And let me start by the fact that, 5 years ago, the world came together and the world leaders agreed on a set of very big global agendas that they are directly related to sustainability. We have, of course, the Paris Agreement, which is one of the most ambitious agendas ever, and it wants to keep our planet in the right temperature. We have the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development that focuses on increasing prosperity, social inclusion, and, of course, environmental regeneration. 1 year after these two agendas that they happened in 2015, the New Urban Agenda came, which have a shared vision for a better and more sustainable urban future. We had also the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which more or less it says how we are going to finance all these big development goals. And before all this agenda, also the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction has put up some basic parameters on how we can deal with disasters and how actually we can deal with the great challenge of climate change adaptation. So all these 5 agendas, many times when now I work with countries, there's a question on, are they too many? Do we need any different plan for each one of this agenda? And one of the answers we give to the countries is that we need to see the convergence of the global agendas, and we need to find the nexus approaches to implement global agendas. So it's not about having one plan for each agenda, although some of them, they have their specific requirements. For example, the Paris Agreement specifies the nationally determined contributions to be submitted, but we need to see things in a holistic way. And we need to see things in a holistic way because the problems we have are not in isolation. And I would like to present you here some basic indicators for climate and environment in Asia and the Pacific. So the region is consuming more than 50% of all natural resources, more than 50% of all natural resources. And it produces about 1/3 of the world economic output. So with these two figures, you can immediately see that the way the economy is run in Asia Pacific is not very efficient. We use more than half of the resources to produce 1/3 of the economic output. And let me tell you another figure, which I don't have here, but it's a very well-known figure. It takes the region of Asia and the Pacific double the amounts of natural resources and materials to produce 1 unit of GDP. So this kind of very low resource efficiency creates problems. So the region is responsible for more than 50% of the global greenhouse gases emissions, a direct link with the resource consumption, as you can see. One of the most problematic areas in the world when it comes to deaths from air pollution. 60% of global deaths from air pollution are coming and are happening in our region. And I think many of us, we are living in cities that we see in our daily life the problem of air pollution. More than 60% of coastal mangroves, one of the most important ecosystems for biodiversity, for climate regulation, has been lost. And more than 90% of the solid waste in this region is leaked improperly in our rivers, in the oceans, in the natural environment. So this is a picture which is not the most beautiful picture we can have on climate and environment in Asia Pacific. And now, the last months, we are dealing also with the COVID-19. And I think it's necessary to put the argument, and actually the argument that is supported by scientific research, that the COVID-19 and other pandemics like this is nothing more than the result of the unsustainable way that we are doing our business. It's the outcome of how people alter the natural environment, the way we grow, trade, and consume food, and the way we cover our energy needs. So pandemics like the COVID-19 have happened because we broke our link of human development and economy with the natural environment. And actually, research shows us that more than 50% of all primary drivers of past disease emergencies are actually from an environmental factor, either land use change or agricultural change or climate and weather. And you know, one of the things I saw now that we had the COVID-19 pandemic is that many people, they say, oh, the environment is taking a breath because we have less CO2 emissions, we have less air pollution. But I'll show you one graph that I got from The Economist, and this is how air pollution returning to cities after the lockdowns. So what you can see here is that we have the V-shaped return on the negative environmental impact. The V-shaped return that it's sought for the economies, I don't know if it's happening, but the V-shaped return to negative environmental income is happening, impact is happening. And we have all these complex problems, and we need to understand that no challenge emerges in isolation. I have here a figure which is done every year by the World Economic Forum, is the Global Risk Perception Index. And I hope you can see in the screen how actually the diseases and the emergence of diseases is connected directly with a lot of environmental issues like the biodiversity and ecosystem collapse, the failure of the climate change action, the natural disasters. So we have an interconnected system of challenges that needs a system approach to be solved. We cannot focus only on sectoral approaches. So we need approaches that they bring co-benefits, that they bring a holistic way on how socioeconomic policies avoid adverse lock-in effects of economic system, like the externalities. We need an approach that is cooperative to save time and inclusive so we can leave no one behind. And one solution point is the circular economy. I'm not going to go into the details what is a circular economy. I will leave this for our panelists, but I want to highlight four main issues behind the circular economy. A circular economy is one that is focusing on low carbon and pathways for the Sustainable Development Goals. It's one that it preserves and enhances the natural capital. It's optimize the yields we have from natural resources so we can produce more with less. It eliminates the negative externalities of the economy and fosters system effectiveness. So that's why a circular economy is a very big need and a very big opportunity on the way that Asia Pacific will continue to develop. We need also to implement this circular economy with a set of tools, economic, regulatory, cooperation, information instruments. And what we will do in our panel today is probably to understand better the issue and see some of these tools. So we'll talk about circular economy and conservation, investment opportunities and challenges for circular economy, and also how circular economy is connected with the SMEs, and this will be done by our experts. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to give first the floor to Mr. Henry Chan, Conservation Director of WWF Malaysia, for his introduction. Henry, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Stefanos, for laying out a very comprehensive introduction to what circular economy is. My presentation will be very focused on conservation, and I would like to pose that question: can circular economy support conservation? As conservation now, I would like to show how circular economy can support tiger conservation, elephants, orangutan, and of course in the marine areas, the turtle, marine life like the turtles. And with that, I would like to pose three key questions, or rather three outlines how I would like to share my thoughts. The first is to define the problem of plastics leaking into nature and how it impacts on wildlife and we human beings. The second is to identify the solution, which basically is about reduce, reuse, recycle, and then in the context of the circular economy. And my third area will be looking into the question of the panel today, which is the next big opportunity and how circular economy can help address the challenge of climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, on the problems, I think this figure. Yeah, this YouTube, if you could go to YouTube and look into this turtle and the turtle straw. Basically, this is a very iconic picture showing how the scientists happen to find a turtle that has the plastic straw stuck into its nostril. And you have got this another iconic picture of turtle eating plastics. So what happens is that when plastics floats in the sea, it looks like jellyfish, and jellyfish is the food of the turtles. Well, this is a impact to individual species, but out in the Pacific, there are several patches where the plastics from around the world will just circulate around and around in the ocean, and you'll gather in patches amount to kilometers wide. It's called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And over time, through exposure to sunlight, the plastic will disintegrate and will break into pieces, and anything that is less than 5 millimeter in size would be called microplastics. Some of them would be smaller in sizes, and as they float in the water or goes down into the depth of the ocean or into the seas, some of these plastics will be eaten up by fish, and in turn they'll be consumed by bigger fishes. And when we, the fishermen, could catch them and sell them back to us, we ourselves would begin to eat microplastics. Now, just this year, there's the emergence of the new problem called plastic rain. So basically, the microplastics get blown up into the atmosphere, and it will when the rain comes, it will just fall to us. So this is a new phenomenon. And over here, I listed some of the materials you can read if you wish to download these materials. Now, in the context of Southeast Asia, this map here shows how plastics is circulating around the seas. And basically, with the flow of the ocean, they will eventually accumulate up to the coastal areas. And you find that to a large extent, the plastics is happening and circulating around the South China Sea. and it will just gather in important places to our coastal environment. I now would like to look into the solutions of addressing the leakage of plastics into nature. And obviously, most of us here will be familiar with this symbol of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I need not go deeper into that because at the household level, at the consumer level, we can all do our part by avoiding single-use plastics, avoiding use of straws, and so forth. And wherever possible, we should reuse the materials and then recycle them. However, at the extent that you just saw earlier of the plastics going into the Pacific Ocean, of the plastic circulating the South China Sea, how they break down into pieces and into microplastics, the household and the individual initiative will not be able to address the problem. We need a systemic change that Stefano has presented earlier. And this is through circular economy. Now, what does circular economy look like? There are many illustrations that you can see, but basically, one of the elements to address the plastic garbage is through organic and mechanical recycling. I would like to spend a bit of time here because this forms the basis of the presentation by my co-panelists. So basically, if you look into the mechanical recycling, the household would dispose the material. In a good recycling approach, you would segregate your materials to plastics, into glasses, into tin, and into organic materials. And the collection will be taken up by recyclers. On a regular basis, they will collect the garbage from your garbage bins, and they will sort them out. And anything that cannot be recycled will then be incinerated, and it will be generated into energy. So we can call this from waste to energy. And the carbon dioxide that have been produced from the burning will then be absorbed by agricultural crops. Please bear in mind this aspect as well, because I'm going to talk a bit more elaborate toward the last part of my presentation. And therefore, when the plants absorb the carbon dioxide, and they will produce biomaterials, and they can be reprocessed into ethanol. From ethanol, it's been further processed into ethylene, and from ethylene, it becomes bio-based plastics. So likewise, from the sorting aspects here, anything that can be recycled will go into recycling plant. They will be sorted out further and reprocessed into bio-based plastics. And from there, it will go into bio-based end products, and the cycle goes on. So this, in a sense, is one example of circular economy. The other aspects is on organic recycling. So likewise, the materials that can be decomposed or be processed in the bio materials, it be collection, and then there will be compost plants, and likewise, the materials that decompose will produce gas. It's called biogas, and then you can go into compost and so forth. Yeah, and the compost that you produce can go to agriculture crops, and they will absorb carbon dioxide and go to biorefinery and bioplastics and so forth. So this is another form of circular economy on organic farming, on organic recycling. The example would help explain why huge investment is needed towards adopting a circular economy. I now come to the third part of my presentation, talking about how circular economy can be better understood and implemented in the context of climate change, as well as how it can contribute towards addressing the issues of diseases like that arose due to zoonotic disease. Yeah. In circular economy, we have three basic things that we need to remember, which is the first one is to reduce. The three cycles: reduce, recycle, and reuse. And there are other additional elements like proper waste disposal systems, preventing leakage into nature. And the new element in the plastics economy is to look into new designs and to be innovative in how the materials arising from plastics can be recycled and can be reproduced into various forms of materials. So this is the basic approach of circular economy in addressing plastics waste. I would now want to focus on the right side of the circular economy, which is recycle and reuse, by looking into how a policy instrument called Extended Producer Responsibility (EPR) can support the circular economy. So first of all, let us again look into recycling. What we can do at home is to segregate our materials, our waste into various components. Anything that can be degraded, we can compost them. And materials that can be recycled, we will put into the segregated bins, plastics, glass, tin, and so forth. And here the collection will be able to come and collect and reprocess them back into polymers or plastics. Anything that, as the diagram earlier shows, anything that cannot be reprocessed or decomposed can then be incinerated and produced into energy. Yeah, and this can be reabsorbed by reforestation. And with this recycling and reuse of the materials, there's a likelihood that the disposal system going to landfills would be reduced, and therefore there would be less materials leaking into nature. However, as we saw earlier in the context of Southeast Asia, the extent of plastics pollution or the source of plastics pollution is not just based on a few places, but it's come from many places. Hence, a systematic approach needs to be needed, and even then, plastic will still happen. So we still need to do bleach cleanup activities and so forth. Now, all these activities requires investments and cost of operations, and the extended producer responsibility is able to support circular economy. Extended producer responsibility means that the responsibility of the producer or the distributor. So take example for Coca-Cola. So in the present context, the moment Coca-Cola sells or rather the supermarket sells the bottled drinks to you, that ends their responsibility. Yeah. So we as consumers, we will drink and then we will dispose them, and it's up to the municipal city council to go and collect them. Now, under extended producer responsibility, Coca-Cola would extend that responsibility to ensure that all its materials will be collected, reprocessed, recycled by selling a higher price to us as consumers. Yeah. So if you can imagine everything that is being produced and sold, every producer, every distributor would have the same responsibility by charging an advance cost to the consumer. Then that the amount of money that we can get will then be going into that systems. So the amount, yes. All right, let me continue. So the amount of plastics that is collected in Malaysia is about 500,000 ton, and using the EPR license fees, using the German price at 450 ton per euro, will come that on an annual basis, the amount of license fees collected will amount to about 1.1 billion US ringgit, sorry. And this money can go into the whole systems to collect the waste. So this is EPR, and I think our colleagues will talk a lot more on this afterward. I come to my last slide, which is a very cluttered and a crowded space, but it's important to understand how this can support air conservation. Now, one of the most important material for plastics is actually fossil fuel, and it is important that fossil fuel be reduced. Now, to reduce fossil fuel, we need to have an alternative plastics, and that is bio-based plastics. As I mentioned earlier in the earlier slides, materials that is cultivated, that is planted, like tapioca, corn, and potatoes, any elements that contain carbohydrate can then be processed into ethanol, reprocessed into ethylene, and then go into bioplastics. So in this case, then what we can do is through a number of cultivation activities, you can plant plants in between your crops, and then you can generate that. Now, what is important is in the context of climate change is we need to undertake reforestation. Large forests has been converted over the last centuries and decades. We need to bring back our land into forests. Now, to plant trees back into forests requires huge amount of investments. For WWF, uh, we we need at least 1,500 US dollars to plant back 1 hectare of land over a period of 5 years. So this requires huge investments. And by planting carbohydrate in between the growing trees, a measure what I call agroforestry, agriculture and forestry, we can um, introduce planting of these materials between trees, and the industry can then purchase this material and process into bioplastics. And this basically will address climate change because it helps to absorb the cost of reforestation. And the outcome is, apart from establishing more forests, is also to ensure that our forest habitat is being retained, enlarged, to keep wildlife. And it is here that the issues of the pandemic 19, and zoonotic diseases can be addressed. By having large forests, intact forests, the diseases can be kept in the natural environment. So,
If you wrap up, Dr. Henry.
all right, I'll end here. So, in summary, circular economy supports the Basel Convention and Paris Agreement and Bonn Challenge and the New York Declaration. And I would like to conclude by posing the question back again that I asked earlier. Can circular economy support conservation? So the answer is basically yes. The 3 Rs and circular economy can prevent plastic leaking to nature. The EPR can generate more than $1 billion in Malaysia from garbage that is otherwise a burden. And lastly, the production of bioplastics into circular economy can support reforestation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Henry, and thank you for giving all the spectrum on the circular economy. Thank you for your positive message. And I think you highlighted also the importance of the private sector. So I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Regula Seg, the Managing Director, Asia of Circulate Capital, to talk about the next big opportunity on the circular economy. Regula, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Stefanos and Henry. It's a great pleasure to be here and share with you some of our thoughts around how we can address the circular economy in South and Southeast Asia and why we see it as the big next opportunity. Stefanos said, my name is Regula Seg. I'm the Managing Director Asia of Circular Capital. Circular Capital is an investment management firm based in Singapore, which launched its first ocean fund late last year, which really addresses the leakage of plastic into the ocean, valorize the plastics, build the necessary infrastructure on the ground, and make sure that the plastics we consume is brought back into the circular economy and recycled accordingly. So we heard quite some staggering numbers from our two former speakers. And I think two of them I just would like to bring up again. Dr. Stefanos, he said that more than 50% of the resources globally are consumed in Southeast Asia. However, that more than 90% of solid waste is leaking improperly. And when you look at that, this is in itself a great opportunity to think about how we bring that material back into the circular economy. Now, we heard as a consumption and production powerhouse, Asia has the potential to showcase the circular economy at scale. There's tremendous opportunity if Asia embraces these opportunities and could, over the next 20 years, really increase economic growth of more than 324 billion and create significant amount of jobs in this area of circular economy. But what it also could do and can do, and it's extremely important, is that by building the necessary circular infrastructure in solid waste management and plastic recycling in Southeast Asia and South Asia, focusing on India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Asia, we can reduce the global plastic leakage by about 45%. And we can really, we see, and we would like to showcase to you how we can valorize that plastic, which usually has either been improperly landfilled or it has been leaking into the ocean. What is the big problem we would like to address today from a financial perspective? To build the necessary infrastructure and to build a systemic approach, as we heard before, there is significant capital missing. Today in solid waste management and plastic recycling in Asia, there is a lack of evidence-based track record, meaning there is a lack of capital and there is a lack of pipeline. Not that it's not out there, it is, but the financial industry so far has not really addressed and invested in systemic approaches to tackle solid waste management and material recycling in Southeast Asia. And our approach is to really come in as so-called catalytic capital and bridge this gap. When you look at the money currently available, we're talking maybe there's 20 million, maybe 30 million available for today's pipeline in Asia. But to really grow the infrastructure, we need billions. And this money is not available because the institutional investors have not yet tapped into that market. The banks often don't understand the intrinsics of this industry. So there is where we're coming in as circular capital with our ocean fund to bridge that gap, to bridge the missing middle, to build smaller businesses to the next level, whereby institutional investors have an interest to come in and invest. We want to show that there is a pipeline out there for investment opportunities. There is, we can showcase that there is money to be made while having a significant environmental and social impact. This was possible because of the investment of some of the largest multinationals and fast-moving consumer good companies, which have been championing and really committed to supporting and funding the buildup of this infrastructure in Southeast Asia. So we see some of the largest companies such as Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, Danone, Chanel, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, but also chemicals like CP Chem and Dow have committed to our fund to build that infrastructure. Their role is not just to provide funds, their role is also to provide technical assistance, advisory, and they all have an extensive interest in the offtake of the recycled material, because they're really championing the idea of bringing the material back and use recycled material in their packaging. But it cannot be done initially without blended finance. And I think when we look at the sheer need of capital, the blended finance is key to de-risk some of our investment opportunities we have. And therefore, we've brought on board and have been given the opportunity to work with the International Development Finance Corporation of the United States, who has given us a guarantee to de-risk our loan portfolio. Now, how do we go about the circular economy in plastic recycling? We have put out there a very systemic approach, and we have three pathways. One is really innovation, and we heard that in the prior presentations. While we need to tackle the plastics which we produce and consume daily and bring it back into mechanical recycling and into the circular economy, we also need to address it from an innovation perspective, meaning we need to look at how we consume, how we design our products, how we deliver our products, to make sure that we can, wherever possible, move away from plastics or from multi-layer plastics to more recyclable plastics or to innovative material which is replacing plastics. We also need to provide digital solutions which really bring transparency to the market so that we have a better understanding of the material flow from a consumer perspective, how it flows to the recycling, how much is leaking, at what price can you actually pick the material, trade the material and bring it back. So there's a lot of data missing. But what we're focusing on right now, because when we look at the sheer material leaking into the ocean, is switching off to tap, and building the infrastructure in collection and sorting of the material all the way to the household level, in building recycling capacity, and then bring it back to the manufacturing of the material. So it's really diversion of the material from and preventing it from leaking and recycling it. These are just to give you an idea, 2 companies we have invested in, which are great examples in how to support SMEs in these countries and build circular economies. It's Lucro, it's a Mumbai-based company. It's a manufacturer of and recycling of difficult to manage flexible packaging. This is particularly shrink wrap. It's low density material, which often is actually what is leaking into the ocean. And they bring it back by collecting, sorting it, and recycling it into other high-end products for reuse. And then the other option is 3D Oasis. It's a company, a female-led company in Indonesia, which we invested in. And what they're doing is also collecting and sorting PET bottles, recycling it into flakes, and bring it back into the use of recycled packaging and textiles. These are 2 examples of how very successfully we can build infrastructure on the ground, not only in manufacturing, but also in the upscale and in the upstream collection and sorting, valorize the material, which we usually just throw away, and bring it back into the manufacturing process of multinational corporations. With that, I stop, and I look forward to really addressing in more detail how plastic and solid waste management can be a critical support of the circular economy in Southeast Asia. Thank you, and hand it over back to you, Stefanos.
Regula, thank you very much for this really a very comprehensive presentation, and thank you for putting the numbers behind the challenge. So clearly see how we should go from the 20 millions to the 2 billions. It's a 100 increase scale magnitude. I think it should be possible, because I want to say that 2 billions might sound like a lot of money, but if you see the 2 billions in perspective on what we consume and how much we invest on other sectors, it's not really such a big money, and I think they could be found. So thank you very much, and we'll come back certainly to this issue of the investments. I would like now to bring to the screen Lorraine. And Ms. Lorraine Katlabayan is a senior sustainable consumption and production expert, and is dealing particularly with small and medium enterprises, which are a very big part of the economy, especially in Southeast Asia. So Lorraine, the floor is yours for your presentation and reflection on circular economy and SMEs and the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefanos. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to take part on this webinar on circular economy. My work with the Switch Asia SCP program, Sustainable Consumption and Production Program, has showed me how countries in Asia are developing and implementing SCP policies, and showing how it is important for stakeholders, including the business sectors, SMEs, to deliver SCP on the ground, including circular economy approaches. So as sustainable consumption and production is clearly linked to circular economy, looking at the life cycle approach on SCP, providing the perspective of how sustainability can be achieved through resource efficiency, cleaner production, responsible consumption, and ensuring that the life of products result to a circular approach where resources or the products can be repaired, reused, redesigned. This shows that SCP provides the overarching framework towards green growth, and which embodies the circular approach. And further integrating SCP into an overarching policy framework is important, where government, technology, innovation, new business models, stronger multi-stakeholder partnerships, and effective awareness-raising efforts are critically important for us to move towards a more circular economy approach. And you've heard about the circular economy from our previous speakers, but just to emphasize the design for sustainability, which is important in shaping the circular economy. And it is more than just recycling the products. This new paradigm will require eco-innovation, to have a good product design, and also the need for strong awareness raising efforts in order to change consumers and producers' mindsets. And the circular economy has gained traction, looking at resource efficiency as a cost-saving and responsible approach to reduce waste and maximize the use of resources so as to conserve the resources we have in the environment. And the EU Switch Asia program, where I'm from, we support as Asian countries in this transition towards a low carbon, resource efficient, and a more circular economy approach while contributing to poverty reduction. So the program provides technical assistance to governments, supporting them in improving their national strategies and action plans with regards to sustainable consumption production. And it also carries out advocacy activities at regional level and also provides support through grant projects to businesses and small medium enterprises. And the Switch Asia Grants program, it provides support to SMEs to adopt cleaner technologies and more sustainable industrial practices, and also providing awareness, helping consumers to act more responsibly in their daily choices and lifestyle. And in the Switch Asia program, we have supported SMEs in various sectors on waste management, on tourism, and so forth, providing capacity building and also support on providing opportunities for investments toward resource efficient practices in production and also in consumption awareness raising campaigns. So from these grants, we're looking at a two-level approach of interconnecting it to policy dialogue, because the Switch Asia grant projects needs to scale up and also influence and link with governments to scale up these initiatives. And these projects have shown that supporting the sharing of knowledge and developing local capacity for responsible business practices, this will provide more help towards SMEs to implement SCP practices and circular economy approach. And in line with the Switch Asia project, we also provide support to policy in governments, and the national governments have already made some formulation on SCP policies and action plans. This resulted to SCP roadmaps and action plans in Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Philippines, and Vietnam. And they focus on green public procurement, eco-labeling, eco-innovation, tourism, and sustainable lifestyles. Maldives, Laos, Myanmar, and Cambodia are also developing their SCP roadmaps or national action plans on implementing SCP also in capacity building activities. So these SCP policies have emphasized the importance of the circular economy approach in various sectors, and some have also developed action plans on circular economy. And in Malaysia, the national SCP blueprint has identified circular economy waste system as their fourth pathway. And it recognizes the need to shift to a circular model requiring a full-scale adoption of waste reduction, reuse, and recycling measures. In Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia, they have started developing also national circular economy plans, and soon also in Vietnam with the support of the Switch Asia program. So these national SCP and circular economy policies highlight the importance also of linking with the initiatives coming from in the global level. So the European Green Deal is a big step with the EU, and the Switch Asia, in line with the EU Green Deal, is currently providing support to other countries in terms of mainstreaming circular economy approach. For example, in Vietnam, where they are mainstreaming SCP and circular economy in their National Socioeconomic Development Plan. And also in Laos, we are also providing support to develop policy options on addressing the minimization and reduction and prevention of use of plastic material and waste, particularly on single-use plastics, through resource efficiency, minimization, and awareness raising in selected priority sectors. So these lessons learned and best practices on EU on directive on the single use of plastics will be a key element of its support. And also currently Switch Asia is supporting projects on textiles in Cambodia, Mongolia, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, on resource efficiency and cleaner production in the construction sector in Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Mongolia, on plastics prevention in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and India, and on waste to energy as part of a circular approach in China and India. So through Switch Asia's partnership with government and stakeholders, we hope to contribute to a transition towards a low carbon, resource efficient, and circular economy in the Asian region. And in line with the various initiatives such as the Circular Economy Action Plan and the European Green Deal in the European Union, the Switch Asia supports the government and stakeholders to advance circular economy models, to support inclusiveness, in particularly in developing countries. And we are constantly providing support to grant projects, also supporting small and medium enterprises on circular economy, linking sustainable product procurement on circular economy, providing capacity and support on shifting towards sustainable packaging and bioplastic materials, looking at recovery and recycling in terms of waste, and so far, and also the circular economy business models and startup support. So in this way, circular economy is a long journey that requires collaboration, networks, and strong engagement from multi-stakeholders in partnership with government in order for us to drive it successfully and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine, and thank you for going through the specifics on the grants programs and also how you try to upscale. Switch Asia is something is very close to my heart. I had the privilege actually to be one of the first project managers of the Switch Asia, and I wish you all the best of luck. So good to have all the panelists right now in the screen. We have questions from the audience, and I will start directly with the questions from the audience. So the first question is for Henry. So Henry, you mentioned that bio-based materials could help reforestation. Could you please explain how this could be done?
Yeah, first of all, we need to understand the premise of bio-based plastics. In fact, plastic itself is derived from ethanol, and ethanol is derived from fossil fuel. So we must replace use of fossil fuel. So ethanol can be produced from carbohydrate, yeah, the tubers, the fruit crop that we have. So what happens is that the plastic industry need a new source of bio-based plastics. So farmers can plant the carbohydrate and they can sell it to the plastic industry. So there's a basis. But to ensure that the farmers actually have a market, we must have contract farming. So on the regular basis. Now, what WWF is against use of bioplastics is we cannot turn food crop into plastics. Food is meant to feed humanity. So it's important that only projects such as reforestation, the land is meant for reforestation, can be planted with such kind of crop. So that must be clarified. So it's a contract between the plastics industries buying the carbohydrate from the farmer. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Can I follow up on this question? What about the implications for food security that a focus on biofuels and biodiesel could have? Isn't there a risk that because of an increased interest on biofuels, for example, some crops could be more prioritized for this, and then we can have an increase on the price of food or issues of food security?
Yes, that's correct. Absolutely right. So we must look into the country's policy. So for instance, Malaysia has decided that 50% of the land mass must be under natural forest cover. And some of these forest cover have been degraded due to conversion and so forth. So the law specifies that it must be protected or it must be under forest reserves. So any places that are supposed to be forests but have been degraded, this is the places that we talk about having to do with reforestation. Or if the forests are fragmented, we need to have wildlife corridors. So such places is meant for forests. It's not meant for food. Yeah. Therefore, we should separate land uses. It's about countries' policy on how you determine your land use plan.
Thank you for the very clear message, Henry. So, Regula, the next question is for you. There's participants, when you see me looking like the other ways, I'm looking at my other screen to read the questions. So the question is that in Malaysia and I suspect in much of Southeast Asia, the main issue with plastic flowing into the ocean seems to come from a lack of waste collection for communities living on the coast or on rivers. Have you seen any solutions to this?
Thank you for this question. Certainly, I cannot deny that there's a big leakage happening and near the rivers and coastals. But I think that is not the only problem. I think the problem is really that there is hardly any systemic infrastructure available, whether that is in coastal areas or whether that is in city areas. And the fact is that while in many larger cities, material or waste is collected in Southeast Asia, it still does leak, meaning it may be collected, but it may be dumped improperly. And as you mentioned, and then with rain and others, it can still leak, right? So I think this is not about focusing on coastal areas or focusing on others. I think it's about systemically building the necessary infrastructure for proper solid waste management, collection and sorting at source, particularly at the household level, right? But when it's about have you seen solutions? Absolutely. Our product, we as Circular Capital with our Ocean Fund, we invest in collection and sorting or solid waste management as part of the solution to actually get the material back to recycling. And I can give you a very simple example. When we look at investing, we don't just say, okay, that's an interesting company in mechanical recycling of material PET. No, we look at the entire system. And when we look into mechanical recycling, let's say of PET bottles, then we have to make sure that upstream it's also collected so that there is sufficient feedstock. And then that's why we also look and invest in collection and sorting initiatives and companies, privately run companies who do that. That can be very simple, setting up some smaller collection and sorting centers in urban and rural areas, which then provide the feedstock for mechanical recycling in Indonesia. It can be, anywhere. It can be in investing in companies in larger cities such as Manila who really want to find solutions at the source. So yes, it's what we do. It's really finding the right partners to tackle collection and sorting at source and making sure that it is mechanically and manually sorted and it is brought back into the right recycling stream. And so the one cannot live without the other. So if you want to recycle material, you first have to go to the source, and the source is proper segregation, collection, and sorting.
Regula, let me stay a little bit on this because I remember you showed a slide that you have the different pathways, high priority, low priority. So the collection and the segregation was part of this, but then you had other things on the design on a high level. I'm not asking you for a real breakdown, but from this $2 billion that you say we need to fill the gap on the investments, how big is the money that they needed to solve the local problems at the local communities with the collection and management of the waste, so we can avoid having it going into the sea?
Yeah, between innovation and between really fixing the problem as we have it right now, right? I don't have the specific numbers, but just from the sheer situation on the grounds we see in the markets we're operating in, which is India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, but also Malaysia and other Southeast Asian countries, the majority is needed for the infrastructure development. Definitely. And that is where you know, in other countries, governments come in and have the necessary budget. In the Southeast Asian context, often that is a challenge, right? And so the majority is in building the necessary solid waste management infrastructure. And again, not to burn it and incinerate it, but to actually valorize it and bring it back. Sure, the innovation component is important, because that also goes back to the change of the consumer behaviors and the change of how corporations look at the issue, and really see how we can reduce, going to the 3 or 4 R's. Recycling is one component, right? The reuse is another, but also we need to innovate and disrupt and make sure that where plastic is not needed, it should be replaced. So it is a critical component, but I would say the majority definitely goes into infrastructure development right now. Really turning off the phone.
Thank you, Regula, and thank you for your reference also to the need to innovate and take plastic out of the picture. And I think there are many opportunities that we can take plastic out of the picture, especially the single-use plastic, which seems to be one of the really chronic and emerging problems. Lorraine, you mentioned that you are supporting SMEs. You mentioned different sectors, and it was nice to see how Switch Asia is going in different sectors, from agri-food to tourism, so from primary sector, you know, to services. Do you see that SMEs are convinced about the need for circularity? And if they are convinced, what has made them convinced, or the opposite way, what is not convincing them?
Okay. Circular economy now is very much out there, and SMEs has been acknowledging its importance, and they're also acknowledging the importance of resource efficiency as a cost-saving and responsible approach, and to reduce waste and maximize the use of resources. However, there is still much constraint in terms of implementation in the region, in terms of their need for capacity building towards eco-innovation and good product design. So in this case, it is important to support businesses, particularly MSMEs, and sharing knowledge and developing local capacity for responsible business practices, and also providing means for local companies to more easily access the supply chains of multinational companies which seek to establish green and fair conducts within their value chain. And it has been mentioned by the other speakers as well, and it is important to access suitable sources for financing to support SMEs. And now the use of language that is directly relevant to the core of business operations, such as reducing waste, reducing costs, these play a significant role to convincing SMEs to benefit towards implementing sustainable consumption, production, and circular economy approaches.
Regula, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on Lorraine's comments, and particularly now focus again on recycling. SMEs really also in the recycling industry in Southeast Asia are the backbone. They've been around, many companies have been around, they're family owned, first generation, second generation, who've been around and know the market really well. However, they have been undersourced because the market has been very local, right? But now with the issue of pollution getting to a global level, and with the commitments of governments, of multinationals to really be part of the solution, now it is the time to really elevate them to the next level, to really allow them and give them the growth capital they need to become key players in their economy. And we all know, I mean, we need to have these MSCs strengthened to then really become players in the international arena, exactly supported by the multinationals, by them partnering up and taking off the material, right, at fair pricing. It is also critical, as Lorraine mentioned, in our case, in building a systemic approach to solid waste management, is technical assistance. These SMEs need support beyond funding. They need support, access to the market, access to international standards. How do we, labor issues are absolutely, critical to work with multinational corporations. Environmental standards, social standards, as I said, access to these companies, also for technical assistance, for partnership. I think the only way we can resolve the issue is by really building a systemic supply chain, but then each partner to play a key role, and the multinationals not to be just the off-takers, to become a partner and help these SMEs also to innovate. And so that's our approach, and we've seen how this works, and it can work by really bringing them all together. And so really it's about strengthening the local SME landscape.
Just to add as well, because there are multi-stakeholders involved here and emphasizing the government's role on supporting businesses. There are a lot of SCP and circular economy policies, but policymakers, they need to first better understand the complex challenges faced by SMEs, in particular with the capacity towards cleaner production and their constraints, funding constraints faced by SMEs and opportunities towards science, technology, and innovations. And now, because of the COVID-19 crisis, which actually reduced efficiency and where SMEs are still struggling to get by. So support to SMEs clearly need to be, in Switch Asia, we provide a platform where SMEs and governments have their dialogue in terms of policy support, and also for governments to see what the businesses are doing in terms of elevating sustainable consumption, production, and circular economy approaches in their production. And through these partnerships, there's much room for improvement in terms of us gearing towards SCP implementation and circular economy, following a circular economy approach.
Lorena, Regula, thanks. Keep these thoughts, because I want to come back to you on the private sector and the SMEs, and I will prepare a little bit of you on the question. I will come back. I'm listening all these beautiful things that we need more capacity, we need support, we need seed funding. And I remember my very first boss in the United Nations 15 years ago, which is actually now, I think, the boss of Lorraine, Arab Hobala, that used to say that we need carrots, and what you described are a lot of carrots, support, incentives, but we need also sticks. And I want to come back to you later on how you see the need for a more stringent and strict regulatory framework. But before we go to this, I want to go back to Henry, because there's a very important question from the audience. So Henry, one of our participants is saying that incinerating plastic to generate energy will produce toxic gases, which is bad for the humans since it will be emitted into the atmosphere. Also, the microplastics will go into the air and will be bad for the humans to breathe. Could you please share your views on this thing on incinerating plastic? And I have to say, Henry, after you, I will step in on this, because I have also some strong opinion here.
Thank you. Right. I think you're absolutely correct that you cannot just burn anything, right? Some are toxic. That's why Regula has mentioned that, that's why it's a diagram that I showed earlier, that under mechanical recycling, you have to segregate your materials, yeah? So from compost to various materials that you can reduce, reuse, and renovate, and so on. Now, so that the remnant of materials that you cannot process anymore. So what do you do with them? There are two ways to do them. One is you go to the landfills, yeah, and therefore you let nature take for thousands of years for them to degrade. Now, only materials that after you're segregated, that if you burn it, it won't cause any toxic, can go into the incinerator. So there are certain formulas that you need to calculate, and therefore the materials that be generated is basically carbon dioxide. So we had to leave it to the scientists to develop the technology so that the materials that's burned doesn't cause the toxic. Now, on microplastics, yeah, I think what's important is that we need to understand that at the end, microplastics will come and harm us as human beings, yeah, either to the food that we eat, or as a new finding found in the United States, that these microplastics that gather in the form of dust get blown up into the atmosphere, will come down as rain, yeah. So there's a new phenomenon called the plastic rain, is also a common acid rain. So with all the costs that we're talking about, it is important that this problem of plastics and microplastics eventually will come and harm us as human beings.
Henry, thank you. And I want to also contribute a little bit here, because there's a big discussion about the plastic incineration and the incineration of everything that it cannot be recycled or reduced. And I agree very much with you that we talk about circular economy, but we cannot achieve 100% circularity. There's always going to be something that cannot be managed, cannot be handled. And I see from my side as an expert working 27 years in this field, that incineration and landfilling for me are the absolute last choices. And in any case, before we decide if it's going to be incineration or if it's going to be landfilling, it should be based on a very thorough cost-benefit analysis. But I'm not talking only about the financial cost and benefits. I'm talking about the financial, the economic, the social, and the environmental cost and benefits. But definitely, we should not fix one problem, which is taking plastic out of the value chains, by creating another one, which is to pollute the air. Let me go let me continue with the questions from the audience. They talk about the cost of recycling, and they think that the cost of recycling can be so high that ultimately will be borne by the consumers. Regula, could you please comment on if this is really a big cost, and if recycling will affect the price that consumers will pay?
Yes, thank you for this question. It's a very complex question. I mean, complex issue. Generally, and it's something we want to showcase and can showcase already based on the investments we have done and the investments we are looking at. You can make recycling economically feasible, and you definitely can make a return. This is doable. Now, certainly the historically low oil price, the virgin price, particularly during COVID, hasn't really helped the recycling of plastic in general, right? Because you need to certainly have a certain level of dollar, I would say between $60 and maybe $75 per barrel to really also make recycling economically feasible. But when you look at the oil price development, we would expect that it's going up to that level again. But assuming that the virgin oil price is at a reasonable price, recycling is economically feasible and makes sense, because there's definitely the value in the recycled content. That is a very short answer. But obviously, it is more than just the oil price, the virgin oil price, which drives recycling, and it's really about, again, getting the right volume, recycling the right material with the right technology. PET has been well established. I mean, today, there's no problem in taking a PET bottle and recycle it and bring it back into a full circle, closed loop PET bottle, So that is well established. The mechanical properties and machineries are out there. You can do it economically, you can make money with it. Where recycling right now still is a problem, and you mentioned that, going back to the issue of incineration and what is the right approach to what material. There's so many different, like plastics out there, right? PET is easy to recycle. PP you can recycle mechanically these days as well. PE as well. The problem is with sachets, multi-layer plastics, low valuable plastics, where there has not yet been a real breakthrough economic solution to recycle plastics. And so indeed, it could be that we need to find other ways of recycling that material or replace it, right? I mean, that there comes the innovation in where when you cannot valorize it, when you cannot put a real value to the plastic to be recycled, then there is an opportunity for innovation. Multi-layer plastic, redesign it to single-layer plastics, because then it's easier to recycle, or replace it with other material. But overall, as I said, a very complex question, but the major plastics out there as PET, PP, PE, which is the big consumption we have, is recyclable and is economically feasible. The other material, we still need solutions, and that is really where the big leakage is happening into the ocean. And yes, where you, Stefanos, said that incineration is the last resort, I agree with you. Let's rather first really explore all opportunities to really valorize also that material before something gets burned, because incineration remains a linear solution and not a circular solution.
Thanks, Regula. So a lot of discussion about the cost and the consumers. And Lorraine, the Switch Asia is about SCP, so it's about consumption and not only production. So let me go in another question. The participants is saying that I think one of the biggest barriers in circular economy is the role of individual consumers and households. How can we make it super easy for them? I'm thinking things like home-use bio-combustor, mini crushers and cleaners for plastic, glass cans, so that is as easy as throwing into the trash bin, which is the current behavior. So Lorraine, could you address a little bit the consumer part, how we can make things easier for the consumers?
Okay, just in terms of our support to Malaysia that we are working on, and they wanted to focus on sustainable consumption by raising awareness on sustainable consumption production to change people's behavior through communication strategies. And the communication strategy is also reflected in their national SCP blueprint. And this is providing implementation of providing awareness through education and also support for information dissemination to consumers. And for example, in Thailand, they are now drafting a national integration policy where they will enhance the criteria, environmental and social criteria for greener products, and to inform the public on what green products and services are out there. And one of the examples that they used is they have an online application where they provide the green products and services that is available in Thailand in various sectors. So providing information, knowledge on what products that are sustainable out there, the consumers are more informed. And right now, with the technology, with the web providing access for consumers, the consumers are more aware, and they are more inclined to look for more sustainable products, and for them to be able to also participate towards our implementation of SCP and circular economy approaches.
Lauren, thanks. And thanks that in addition to be aware, they are able to take also the step to walk the talk of sustainability. I remember a survey we have done in UNEP about 10 years ago was showing that about more than 1/3 of the consumers were thinking, and they were saying that sustainability is part of their decision making. But when it was going to the real action, it was less than 1 out of 100 that it was taking the final step to do this consumption. So I don't know what exactly is missing. We might find it, but let me go back to Henry, because there's a follow-up question, Henry, on the bio-based plastics, that they need land, water, fertilizers, resources. So have the participant is asking if have this been considered and the negative impacts of potential bioplastics?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it's very important to consider all of these. I mentioned earlier that certain things cannot be turned into bioplastics. First of all, food that we land that has been designated for agriculture, for food security, I must re-emphasize, it cannot be turned into bioplastics. All right, so we settled the question. Now we talk about reforestation, places that government have decided, locations that are degraded, that organizations like WWF, through our sciences and wildlife surveys, have found that it is important for that particular place to be reforested. Yeah. So governments of the world met up in Germany and in Bonn, Germany. They come up with a challenge called the Bonn Challenge, which is to restore 200 million hectares of land, yeah, back into forests. And following that, the private sector met up in New York, so it's called a New York Declaration of Forests, and they have to ensure that there's no more deforestation and to reforest another 150 million hectares of land back into forests. So in its totality, we need to reforest 350 million hectares of land back into forests so that we have the clean air that we can breathe. Where are we going to find that kind of money, right? So the idea of planting carbohydrate in between growing trees that takes 5, 10, 15 years to mature requires something else to be grown within that. It is such type of degraded land which is meant to be forested that we're talking about here, not land meant for agriculture. So the issue of land is addressed. We talk about fertilizers and so on. Yes, it's true. Hence, the compost that we're talking about just now can go back into that kind of reforestation. It's about the entire package. Yeah, the degraded land meant for forest, you plant carbohydrate, turn back into plastics, into bio-based plastics. We talk about agriculture. We talk about helping rural communities to be involved in planting trees, to be involved in agroforestry, and to plant this carbohydrate, and therefore you sell it back to the plastic industry. So that is what we're talking about, not land meant for agriculture, not land meant for food production. Thank you.
Understand. And thank you, Henry, for mentioning these relations, because it reminds me a lot of physics, and the law of entropy. So I think that with what you propose and with the increased forestry, you try to decrease the acceleration of entropy, because entropy is increasing, but we can decrease the acceleration. Henry, let me stay with you because there's a question that it has to do with something that you presented. And actually, this question gives me the opportunity to continue with the Regula and Loren on what I wanted to ask previously. So Henry, the question is that in Malaysia, extended producer responsibility, which was a tool that you mentioned as a main method, will not work due to insufficient enforcement of regulatory frameworks. So do you think that circular economy can take off without government intervention? And let me add here, do you think that circular economy could happen without a very strong and sometimes punitive regulatory framework that enforces the polluter pays principle? And Henry, after you, I will ask also Regula and Loren to comment on this.
Yes, thank you. Basically, extended producer responsibility involve roles of several stakeholders. Foremost is the role of governments, the role of national government in setting policies and legislative frameworks. Without laws put in place, EPR wouldn't work. Yeah, so the fundamental thing is that we need to have a system in which there is a assurance that the money transacted will be captured within the formal economy. We are talking about addressing informal economy with lots of corruption and leakage of finance. Yeah, so that system must be put in place. Now we talk about right at the end, yeah, where materials that can no longer be processed and so on, it will go into the landfill. We need to have strong landfill policies that certain materials cannot go into the landfills. Yeah, so it's a package. So the short to the question is that we must have government policies, and this is nothing extraordinary. Countries like Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, they have already set out the policies, yeah, where the government have mandated the industries and the consumers, yeah, to ensure that they use the materials properly. For example, if a bin is meant for plastics and glass, and you put, biomaterial in there, and the collector will only collect once a week. Can you imagine, the amount of pollution that goes into that bin? So we need to have policies. Thank you.
Thank you. Lauren, let me come to you on the same question, and specifically about the SMEs. How much incentives they want, and how much regulation and sticks they want? Lauren, you are muted. You have to unmute your microphone.
Okay, just on what Stefano said, there's a need for governance, for implementation of policies to work. And a lot of countries in Asia have very comprehensive SCP plans, action plans, and also now circular economy action plans. And it is very comprehensive and looking at various strategies, for example, on waste, which is in the pathway towards the circular economy waste system. And there's a need, and it also emphasized the importance of other stakeholders, including the private citizens, larger industries, and also businesses to take part for the implementation to happen. And the government is regulating the SMEs in terms of them following environmental and social regulations, but also need to provide incentives to ensure that SMEs can be able to produce good products. And also the government supports this also through public procurement, sustainable public procurement policies, and eco-labeling. And having these standards in place ensures that SMEs get to have the criteria in terms of the production of products and ensuring its sustainability. And the implementation of these policies have to be, the SMEs need to be capacitated in terms of being able to follow these criteria through eco-labeling. And they see the importance of this as they extend towards exports and looking at other countries such as the EU, who is now putting stringent measures to ensure that the products that are imported come from sustainable resources.
Thanks, Lauren. So, Regula, I left you last in this one because I'll put you in the spot here, because you saw as you work with the big corporations, the Coca-Colas, the PepsiCos, and you say that they are committing. On the other hand, there's not a single day that in my Twitter feed I haven't seen something saying that that it's these companies, the Coca-Colas, the PepsiCos, that they are responsible for the largest number of plastic waste out there. And I also have a question from my side. Is it the consumers that they demand something, or the companies that they offer something? So my question to you, Regula, regulation vis-a-vis incentives, and if you want help, what is your take, and especially with the corporate sector, the big industries here?
Yeah, sure, thanks. Well, I think it's really not the responsibility of one or the other, right? The consumer has its own power to demand change of products and how the consumer consumes, right? But the corporations also have a responsibility to really build their product so they can be properly recycled, right? And invest in solutions. The government has its important role to play, and we heard that. And I think there's two ways. On one end, it's enforcing of the regulatory framework they put in place, right? But then the other end is also, for example, and something we just learned during COVID, to make recycling and material and solid waste management an essential industry, because it has not been during COVID, so it was shut down, and so there was no, during COVID, there was often no collection, sorting, and there was no recycling. But I think what is also very important as a big step forward to bring that material back into the circular economy at its best is really to consider the plastics to be recycled for food grade applications. Now, again, the technology is out there to use a recycled a PET bottle and put it back into a PET bottle. So it's food contact, food grade quality, but not all governments around the world or bodies have enabled this material to be used for that. So we still see a lot of downcycling, and we need upcycling. So I think the government can play a key role in enforcement, but also in enabling and enforcing the use of recycled content. Because once you have that, there is a market created, right? And then comes the corporations. Yes, they have a role to play, and the ones we work with, they're all committed to a certain amount of recyclable content, whether that is 30% or 50% by certain years, so that they start switching their entire production from virgin products to recycled content where it makes sense, redesign from multi-layer to single-layered, right? And that is a way they can really contribute. But I think ultimately, again, it's an interplay of all agencies to make this work. But I still believe that corporations obviously have a key role in really systemically addressing the issue, in reducing, in substituting, in recycling, and particularly in these three areas. And then also certainly to some extent through their engagement, make sure that material is not mismanaged, right? And so EPR can come in there.
Regula, let me stay a little bit here. We have 5 minutes, but the questions are popping up, and I'm just saying to our organizer, also IGEM and Scale here, and Henry, maybe we'll have the opportunity to organize another webinar at one point, because there's so many questions. But people insist, Regula, and they're asking, what would entice multinational companies to be on board on sustainable consumption and production on plastic other than government incentives? So it seems there's a demand out there to understand, okay, government incentives are needed, but what else is needed?
What else is needed from the multinationals?
What would entice the multinationals to be responsible other than incentives?
I think their companies understanding that they have to pave the ground to find circular solutions. I don't see that they act upon the demand on the governments, but rather understand that this is key to make circular economy part of your strategic direction is key to move into the future. I mean, I think everyone who knows and looks at the economics can say that this is the only way to go, and it makes also, not only does it make environmentally sense, but also economically sense. And I think the overall understanding, it's not driven by the governments for me, it is driven by companies and individuals who understand that this is a good value proposition, and it's the only way to go to make this planet to survive, to continue to thrive, in a sustainable manner. I think it's, frankly, for me, it's just common sense.
Yeah, I want to keep this regular because I also believe it's for companies to understand, but not only the value, to understand the ethical responsibility they have vis-a-vis this work. Henry, you want to make a comment on this too?
Right. Look, companies will
wrap up with this because we were going to the end.
Yes, right. We need a public campaign, right? We need consumers, we need people to understand that plastics affects us. So Richard Attenborough is a great champion. I listed in my page there that in a number of forums he has mentioned that we need to address plastics. And to him, plastics is a new form of slavery. And he put that very strong language for that, so that humanity, so that every one of us will take action and ensure that the plastics industries and the wastage that we produce must be addressed properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry. So we have just, Lauren, you want to add something?
Just to add, because social accountability, it has been here, and consumers and also non-government organizations are actively involved to ensure that their social accountability towards multinational companies to have more environmentally strict standards and products, and to be more responsible in terms of their effects to environment and society.
Thank you, Lorraine. So I would like to close. We have less than 30 seconds to close on this note that I think we all understand that probably the biggest opportunity is the motivation of the private sector, either being SMEs or large multinationals. And I think for this, it needs a combination of incentives, but also a very strong regulatory framework. Because actually it is the private sector that is pushing products. It is the private sector that needs the market to survive. And don't forget also that in an environment of very big income inequality, it is the private sector that is gaining the more benefits. So I would like to thank you all very much, Henry, Regula, Lorraine. I think we have, there are so many questions that we were not able to answer because of the time, but I think this gives us the opportunity probably to think for another webinar or online panel. Let me thank the organizers, and let me thank especially Henry Chong, that he's behind the scenes and he has made this happening. A very big thanks to all the participants and for their very good questions. Sorry that we didn't answer all of them, but we promise that we will try to come back and have some additional interactions for this. So thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you're in the world. Goodbye.